if you guys saw my short yesterday, then you know what today's video is going to be about. Before I get into that though, I do have a usual thing I do in the morning. Good morning and happy hump day, everyone. Let's see, what's my low, my high, my act of kindness? My low would be, actually I would say my low and my high were interconnected because it really was a beautiful day out and it was finally warm again. But I will admit, there were times I'm like, ugh, I'm so hot right now. Oh, that happened a lot. Oh, that really happened a lot. And my act of kindness was, I did a favor for someone yesterday. That's what I did. Yesterday I did someone a favor. Now, if you saw my short yesterday, you know I talked about how, sadly, the great, not the good, the great, Tom Kane had sadly passed away. For those of you who don't know who Tom Kane was, he was a voiceover actor. And he was in a lot of television shows, movies, and video games that a lot of people of my generation, grew up with. I mean, for the sake of this video, I actually looked up a lot of Tom Kane's filmography and roles he's done, because I know definitely a few by heart, and I'll be getting into that momentarily. But he really was in a lot of places that we didn't even realize. I mean, I barely have any idea where to start. Well, I guess I could start with the first role that I ever personally saw or heard Tom Kane's voice in, which was Darwin from the Wild Thornberrys. Yeah, my first experience listening to Tom Kane's voice that I can recall was Darwin the chimpanzee from the Wild Thornberrys. And he would later go on and play Darwin in the Wild Thornberrys movie and Rugrats Go Wild, because the Rugrats and the Wild Thornberrys had a crossover movie. Crazy, right? What else? But here's the thing, he was actually in several other shows that, seriously, I'm looking at this going, man, he was actually in a lot of other plays. Like, Darwin from the Wild Thornberrys is like the first time he had like a legit prominent role in terms of like stuff I'd seen, I heard his voice in. But before that, he was in shows like The Angry Beavers. He was in Cow and Chicken and Johnny Bravo. He was in Spider-Man the Animated Series, in which he was the first voice I heard of Doctor Doom. Yeah. Funny how with Avengers Doomsday coming out, I really should be mentioning that, Doctor Doom's been played by a lot of people, including Tom Kane. Other roles he's done from shows that I've seen him in, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. He was Mr. Harriman. the giant bunny, or funny bunny, said funny bunny, too sweet as a girl. That was actually a really funny episode. Some people watching this know what I just referenced. Oh, know what episode I specifically referenced. And if you want to talk about roles he did that were iconic, I mean, because I mentioned he was in a lot of video games as well. He was the voice of Yoda in Star Wars. Oh, not the first voice of Yoda. That was Frank Oz. But like for video games and like in other media, Tom Kane was the voice of Yoda. Shoot, there's actually a rather clever comment I could say about that, but it might be. Actually, you know what? It's Tom Kane. He was all he's earned this, and I mean this in the best way. But one could say that he's now one with the Force. I mean, again, he was Yoda. What else do I even need to say about that? Let's see. By the way, yes, I am going to get to the role he did. Let's see. He was also Lord Monkey Fist in Kim Possible. He was. Hold on. He was in Ben 10. Oh. For Robot Chicken Star Wars, he was also C-3PO. So he's voiced two Star Wars characters. Cool. You know what I was just about to say? He was in the Boondocks too. And I actually had there was something, before I pressed record, there was something, a Boondocks reference I was gonna make. But then like, wait, was Tom Kane in the Boondocks? And he was! And now I forgot the reference I was gonna say. Darn it. You know what? I mentioned he was Doctor Doom earlier in Avengers vs. the Mightiest Heroes. He was Ultron. Yes. Well, he was also Jasper Sitwell and Professor Thornton, but yeah, everyone's gonna remember as Ultron. He was Woodhouse and Archer. Oh, for the Lego Star Wars Holiday Special, he was also Qui-Gon Jinn. So that's 3 Star Wars characters he's voiced. A lot of video game stuff. And a lot of it is, again, him being, Yoda. But yeah, I think it's about, I walked around this long enough. Let's get into the role I think everyone's gonna want me to talk about most of all. And that was when Tom Kane was the voice of Professor Utonium in the Powerpuff Girls. If you saw my short yesterday, then you know that what I was referencing the opening of the Powerpuff Girls, like sugar, spice, and everything nice. These were the ingredients chosen to create the perfect little girl. And yeah, well, actually, Tom Kane. Wow, they had 2 really great voice actors named Tom for the Powerpuff Girls, but Tom Kenny was the narrator, and he was also the mayor. But it was the professor who was, but it was Tom Kane who was Professor Utonium, and the villain, him. I mean, when it came to Powerpuff Girls villains, him was, he was him, he was arguably their greatest villain ever. Of course, I want to get into talking about the Professor more, because the Professor actually fulfilled something that is actually really hard to do in fiction. Not just entertainment, but I'm talking all forms of media. you know, television, live action, animation, literature, storytelling. It is really, really, really hard to write a good parent character. What I mean is, usually usually parent characters are either just, average good parents, they're just there, or sometimes you'll get like, oh, the kids are rambunctious because the parents are kind of doting and bumbling. And if you're watching The Fairly Odd Parents, Timmy's parents are nitwits. His actual parents, not Cosmo and Wanda. Although Cosmo once did say that they're two halves of a whole idiot. But it's really hard to write good parent characters. I mean, once in a while you'll get someone like an Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird, or Monty Uno from Codename Kids Next Door, or Kratos from God of War. And you can even argue that every single one of the characters I just mentioned are flawed in some capacity. I mean, think about it. Monty Uno was only really a great dad. Well, he was always a good dad, but what made him great was when he was recommissioned in Number Zero. Or, good lord, did Kratos have a long way to go before he became the character that fans know him as now today? Or, unless you're Atticus Finch, it's kind of hard to write like a perfect parent character. And that's not to say like the Professor Utonium was perfect either. I mean, he did have some of those quirks, but he was definitely a lot better than most, fictional parents have been, or since. Because the vast majority of any quote-unquote silly decisions that the professor made on the Powerpuff Girls really did stem from the fact that he was just trying to be a good dad and protect his children. Granted, his children have superpowers. And if you've seen the most recent season of Invincible, you would know that, for all intents and purposes, those 3 little girls don't really need to go to school. But, they do. Which brings me into one of the funniest episodes of the Powerpuff Girls by far, at least to me. And if you're a fan of the Powerpuff Girls, I'm 100% sure you know what episode I'm about to reference. It was the curfew episode. If you're not familiar with the curfew episode of the Powerpuff Girls, I'm sorry, curfew, what happened? Curfew episode. It starts off as the Powerpuff Girls, staying up until all hours of the night fighting crime, as they do. But when they get to school, they're sleeping in class. And so the Powerpuff Girls bring home a note that the professor turned to me, he's like, "Parent-teacher conference? No!" And, they, this was such a great episode. Because, the professor is, always tense, everywhere he goes. He's, tense in the beginning of the parent-teacher conference. And it's during the parent-teacher conference that they discuss that the Powerpuff Girls should have a curfew. A curfew that starts at 7:30 at night. Which, okay. Problem is, though, A, a lot of the really bad crime doesn't really start until much later. And B, as soon as all the villains in Townsville understand just how much better they're off with the Powerpuff Girls being in for their curfew, crime is going to run amok. And that's exactly what happens. The entire episode after after the professor puts the girls to bed at 7:30, like he's worried, like, oh, I'm sure nothing will go wrong, and like every single channel he changes, it's like breaking news of crime like going crazy in Townsville, and like the professor's like getting tense, he's like going crazy, like he's trying to find a single channel where they don't talk about crime running amok. And then it gets to the moment that makes this episode so funny, which is welcome to the time channel. Please note that it's daylight savings time, so you have to turn the clocks back. So it's now 6:41, which is actually a funny reference to how cartoons in the 90s back then were 11 minutes each. So again, because remember they went to bed at 7:30, and now it's 7:41, or sorry, 6:41, because remember it was daylight savings time. And then the professor looks around like, good heavens, I forgot to change the clocks back. By the way, fun fact, this episode of the Powerpuff Girls is what inspired me to always be very diligent about changing my clocks during daylight savings time. So technically it's 6:41. The professor races up to the Powerpuff Girls bedroom, like, it's daylight, go ahead, go. Like, he throws them out the window because they can fly, it doesn't really matter. And so once again, the day was saved. That's a really funny episode of the Powerpuff Girls. And again, a lot of Professor Utonium's episodes revolve around, he makes silly decisions, but he's doing it for the sake of being a good dad. I wouldn't necessarily say he's overly... That's another thing about what made Professor Utonium so great, is that he wasn't overprotective. I mean, he understood that his girls had superpowers. Pretty much wherever they went, they'd be fine. I mean, once in a while they'd show an episode where he'd get worried, and that's when he was making those silly decisions, and he did fall under some of those tropes, but honestly, the really bad decisions were few and far in between, and, the professor was a good character, but you wouldn't have that without a voice. And Tom Kane provided that voice. In fact, even now, as I think about it, I'm running over like every great role I've ever heard Tom Kane in. I keep wanting to say Tom Kenny. No, it's Tom Kane. Tom Kenny's the voice of SpongeBob, who is also, again, the narrator in The Mayor and the Powerpuff Girls. Anyway. Like, I'm looking over all the roles that Tom Kane ever did in my mind. I'm like, it'd be hard to see anyone else in those specific roles that he did. In fact, I really had no idea, which makes me even more sad because obviously I looked up a little bit of like what happened to Tom Kane and why and what happened. Well, a few years ago in 2020, he actually suffered from a stroke, which limited his ability to be a voice actor. And as of this past Monday, when he passed, it was due to complications from the aphasia that he suffered from his stroke several years ago. And to make matters even worse, he was just at a convention where he reunited with Kathleen. I'm sorry, hold on. I always forget how to pronounce Blossom's voice actor's name. Hold on. Kathy Cavadini. Sorry, Kathy Cavadini. That's who. Kathy Cavadini, E.G. Daly, and Tara Strong, who were Blossom, Buttercup, and Bubbles, respectively. And, like, it was really sweet. They all got, like, reunited. But when I saw Tom Kim, like, something's wrong. Like, he looks slower. And I had no idea he had suffered from a stroke at that time. So, and I mean, I mentioned that Tom Kane was in video games and, television movies. He also provided the announcer for theme park attractions at Disneyland and Walt Disney World, as well as served as the announcer for several Academy Award ceremonies, as well as for Adult Swim and the second season of the Eric Andre Show. Tom Kane was everywhere, man. I mean, Star Wars, Call of Duty, Kim Possible, Teen Titans, Ben 10, The Smurfs, the Powerpuff Girls, the Wild Thornberrys. Tom Kane was everywhere. And he was young, too. He was only 64 years old when he passed. But even still, it does make me realize that, a lot of the idols and people that I grew up watching and listening to, they're getting up there in age too. Now it's Tom Kane. Who knows who could be next? So, obviously, I don't need to remind you all to hold your loved ones close and, remember the good times of anything you've ever done, because Lord knows that they're worth a lot more than the bad. And I certainly had a lot of great times listening to Tom Kane's voice and whenever he was in. So my heart goes out to his family and to all of his fans. And I was definitely one of those fans. Thank you, Tom Kane, for everything you did. You gave a lot of people's childhoods a voice. And for many of us, that voice is never going away up here or in here. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, you know what to do. And frankly, I want to say I am very humbled that, I got to hear the voice of an icon growing up. And thank you, Tom Kane, for providing that voice. I'm very hopeful that, if any of his fans or anyone from his family finds this video, I hope they're doing well, given this, sad time. And, listen, I say this at the end of every video, but if anyone wants to talk, feel free to talk to me. Because I'll definitely listen. Make good choices. And, no doubt, Tom Kane definitely had fans in the 607.